Hello and welcome. Today we're going to have a brief introduction to programming in Xcode using iOS 5 for the iPhone. And we're going to talk about what you will need to know, what you will need to have, some programming characteristics of the iPhone device and programming for it, the Xcode interface itself, how it looks, and how we achieve programming in that interface. And we're going to build a basic application. So let's get started. First of all, you're going to need to have an Intel-based Mac computer running either OS X 10.6.7, Snow Leopard, or OS X 10.7, Lion. Lion was released just this summer. Snow Leopard, of course, has been out for a while, but you will need at least a base version of 10.6.7 of Snow Leopard to program. You'll need the iOS SDK version 5, which is downloadable for free at this site, developer.apple.com/iPhone. And that SDK download also contains, you want the one that contains Xcode 4.2 at this writing, or the latest version of Xcode. That is our development environment, our IDE, and it contains simulators for both iPhone and iPad, so you can test your development in a safe environment before porting it to an actual device. You'll also need to have some knowledge of programming, specifically some knowledge of programming in a C-like language, or a language with a C-like syntax, preferably C itself. If you have programmed in an object-oriented programming language, that's a definite plus to you. But at least you should have some awareness of what such concepts as encapsulation and inheritance and polymorphism are. And we'll be making extensive use of those concepts in this course. You also need some knowledge of variables, looping structures in that C-like language syntax, as I already mentioned. And then, of course, some familiarity with the iPhone device itself. If you own one, you're ahead of the game. You already know what the touch interface feels like, works like, and you have a grasp of the idiom of using these devices. As you program, you need to keep the user in mind, of course. It's the #1 rule in programming. So having knowledge of how the device works allows you to write programs that are more typical for the users of that device. So as we write programs for the iPhone, what are some of the characteristics of that programming process? Well, we're using a framework called Cocoa, which is Apple's framework for development on not only on mobile devices, but also for desktops on the Mac computer. It is very different from .NET or Java programming that you might be used to. If you have programmed for a Microsoft phone using .NET or Silverlight, or in Java for the Android, then there will be some differences that you'll notice immediately. First of all, we're developing in a language called Objective-C, and Objective-C is a strict object-oriented superset of the C language. Anything and everything you can say in C, you can say in Objective-C. The Objective-C language just simply adds object-oriented concepts and constructs to the C language. It does it in a very streamlined way, and I think once you get used to some of the syntactic elements, that you'll be very happy with using the language. Only one application at any given time is running on an iPhone or an iPad. All other applications go into a suspended state. The application will pick up right where it left off when you touch the icon for the application again, unless, of course, the application has crashed or iOS has marked it for memory capture. That's rare, but it does happen. if it does happen, we have methods that will allow us to save state and restore that state when the application comes back up. Every application, of course, runs in its own sandbox. We can't go outside of our sandbox. So by that I mean one application running cannot talk to another application running. Remember, only one application is running at a given time. But aside from that concern, applications can't send or receive information from other applications at a user run level. Now, an application does have access to what are called devices on the iPhone. Those devices are things like the accelerometer, the camera, the photo book, the address book, things like that. And we do have access through APIs to those. But we can't talk back and forth between two applications at that level. And of course, there are display constraints. If you're used to programming for desktop computers, you don't have these display constraints. At least they're not this small. The iPhone itself is 320 by 480 points, and I've got that backwards. There may or may not be more pixels than points. In the Retina display on the iPhone, the point to pixel ratio is 2:1, so we have 640 by 960. Again, I apologize, I've got pixels and points backwards. Points are bigger than pixels in a Retina display. We think in points. We program in points. We are looking at 320 by 480 points on the iPhone and 1024 by 768 points on an iPad. The touch interface, of course, for user interaction, again, you must keep this in mind and program toward having a touch interface rather than a keyboard and mouse interface. And that becomes very obvious, and it is actually very simple to do. So at least to get basic interaction going, it's extremely simple to do. In fact, Xcode will handle that for you. The Xcode interface itself, we're going to program a Hello World application, and the reason we're doing this is to show you the process of working in Xcode. And we're going to get right to that here in a moment. But first of all, I list some things for you to look for as we run through this exercise. We want to look at how we start a new project, and we're going to look at the parts of the Xcode interface, the main project window, the editors we use. We use more or less mostly two editors, a code editor and what's called an interface builder. And then there are some folders that are very important: the main program folder, the supporting files folder, and the frameworks and products folders that we'll look at in a little bit. As I say, we're going to build a Hello World application. Hello World is typically the first application you build when you're starting to look at a new programming language, and you do it for a couple reasons. First of all, you want to make sure everything's running and that everything compiles correctly before you proceed to a more difficult or more fully fleshed application. So what we're going to have is a single view. A view is a visible container for other views. So we're going to have a single top-level view. It will contain a UI label component. A UI label is a view, and it has a property called text. So we're going to take the color of the view and change it. We're going to add a label component to the view, and we're going to set that label's text property directly in Interface Builder, and then we're going to build and run the project. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to run Xcode now, and we're going to create a new project, and it will ask us what kind of project we want to create. For this example, I'm going to create a single view application and click Next. And I'm going to call it Hello World and click Next. Notice in that last window, if I can get back to it, there we go. The device family is iPhone. If this box, Include Unit Tests, is checked, please uncheck it for this example. And then we're going to use Storyboard for this, and we can see that Storyboard is a new concept in iOS 5. Previously we were using views, and we're still using views, but the concept of a storyboard is that we hold or encapsulate the window and all of its views into a single storyboard file. And it streamlines development to some extent. If you have been working in iOS 4, some version of that, or before, you'll see some differences with this. Once you get used to it, I think you'll really appreciate the differences that they made, or the changes that they made. So we're going to save our application. And Xcode is going to use templates to create a very simple application. It does a lot of work behind the scenes. We'll look into that as we discuss Objective-C in depth in the next few lessons. But the things to look at, we've got some project level settings in this window, and across the top we can get to informational settings and build settings and phases and rules. Over in this side, in this navigator window, we have a list of folders, and we'll see a folder named after the project, and that folder is going to contain two things. It's going to contain our storyboard file. It's going to contain the classes for our application, and it's also going to contain a subfolder called Supporting Files. And Supporting Files is where you would put resources for your application that are outside of the application build, or built with the application, but outside of the scope of building in Xcode, such as images or music resources or things like that. It contains some informational files, hello world info.plist and info.plist strings and PCH file. The most important file in here right now for our concern is main. And main, it contains the C language main function that will start off the entire running process. We'll be looking at that in our next session. We also have a frameworks folder. Frameworks, if we expand that, contains the frameworks required to run and display the application. And this is Cocoa. There is a framework called UIKit, a framework called Foundation, and a framework called Core Graphics. And we'll talk about each one of those and what they do and what pieces of Cocoa are present in each. And then we have a products file, and the products file contains the target, the build target. If we were building for multiple targets, there would be multiple products here. But for now, we have just one, since we're only building for the iPhone. So let's take a look at this main storyboard.storyboard file. And we see a graphic user interface that displays that for us. And we're going to open this third button in the view cluster of buttons here. This third button opens up, depending on the editor you're in, it will open up properties for that object. And right now we're looking at the properties of the Hello World View Controller object, which is the object that contains the view. Now the view, if we select that, we see that we can edit the view's properties. This Hello World View Controller, however, is actually these two files. This is the header file declares, and the M file or implementation file defines that controller object. So we'll go down to the view, And over here we can see that we can change the background color. And we'll change that to something cheerful. And then we'll drag a label object to our view. And we'll change its size so that it is all the way out to the user interface guidelines on both sides. Make it a little bit bigger vertically, and we'll change that font, the minimum font size, to 30. Notice that also changes the system font size to 30. And then we'll center that label inside of we'll center the text inside of the label. There's much more detail that we can go into concerning these properties, their matrix, or their metrics, how they're connected to one another, and we'll definitely do that soon. But for now, just to illustrate, we're just doing a very simple Hello World program. So when we run this program, we don't want it to say label. We would like for it to say Hello World. So in the text property of our label, we'll select that text and we'll change it to hello, world, and enter. And that's reflected in the text of our label. If we go to the product menu, you can see there's a build selection, Command B, and we can build it there or use the keystroke combination. And we get a progress indicator that shows us the build progress. And very shortly that'll complete. And we'll get a small box down here that says build successful, or we'll get some or build succeeded there, or we can get some error messages, and they will pop up in this fourth area right here if our build was not successful. The next thing we want to do is run our application. Again, in the product menu, we can see the run selection, or we can just click this button, which will actually do a build and then a run. And sometimes we do that. It is normally better to save if you're going to do a build and run, but by default, saving happens automatically. So now the iOS simulator, the iPhone simulator, will run first, and then it's going to attach to this Hello World program. And the first time this runs, especially if the simulator isn't up already, it takes a few moments to start. But we see this message attaching to Hello World, running Hello World on iPhone simulator, and there we go. So what do we have? We have changed the color of the view, we've placed a label on the view, we've altered its text, and then this application is running. Again, this is a very simple application, and it doesn't do much, if anything at all, except display some text. If we click the Home button, the application will fade into the background, and its icon is here. Now, that application is not running, it's in a suspended state. If we click the icon again, then we get the application, which comes back right where it started. Now, you can't see any difference, or there is nothing happening, but if there were activity in the application, you would see that it would come back right where it started. So that's a very simple introduction to Xcode, and the very simplest of applications, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be talking soon. Thank you.